This is Bogota Big Ideas. Great ideas from Bogota. Created by Invest in Bogota and supported by Bogota's Chamber of Commerce and the District Secretariat for Economic Development, Bogota Big Ideas is a digital space where we seek to debate and talk about the major global issues that affect us nowadays. We discuss with organizations, experts, governments, and companies about their vision, experiences, and projects that are changing the world today. Highlighting our human talent, the impact of our companies, and our city programs, we want to create weekly discussions that generate interest in the world, all from Bogota's perspective. In 2021, we're coming back stronger because we're looking forward to being closer to you and making this space the ideal place for global conversations. That is why we present to you our Bogota Big Ideas ecosystem: webinars, podcasts, talks, academy, and blog. Join us, interact, and share.
Good morning, everyone. I am pleased to have all of you here today. From the city's investment promotion agency, Invest in Bogota, we welcome you to this event where we will discuss the most relevant aspects of the new social investment law for companies. At this time, we would like to thank and greet our panelists from Ministry of Finance and PricewaterhouseCoopers for their presentations on today's subject. Today, we have the chance to get a glimpse into the new social investment law from the national government's perspectives and become familiar with the main modifications brought by the law by the tax regime. I am Mauricio Romero, the Executive Director in charge of Invest in Bogota, which is a public and private partnership between the Chamber of Commerce of Bogota and City Hall. Our mission is to support investors who are exploring or looking for business opportunities in the city. For us, it's a pleasure to promote events like this that allow us to improve knowledge and understanding of binding legal frameworks in Colombia. Clearly, learning about main aspects of the new social investment law is key for economic growth of Bogota. We hope you take the most out of this panel as a relevant scenario where the government will peer into the scope of the social investment law and PricewaterhouseCoopers will introduce the main changes in the tax regime that impact companies. Furthermore, they will be explaining the legal provisions and incentives therein that promote employment relationships, job creation, and help companies, of course, affected by the crisis led by the long-standing effects of the pandemic that took place last year. Once again, we thank you, all of you, for joining us today and to our panelists for their insight. I leave you with Alejandra Rodriguez from our Investment Climate Office, who will be moderating today's event. Thank you so much for your attention.
Good morning. My name is Alejandra Rodriguez Cortez. I am Climate Investment Attorney of the Strategic Support Management Area here at Invest in Bogota, and I will be moderating this event. We once again thank you for your assistance. Please avail yourselves of the chat to submit your questions throughout this session. We will forward them to each panelist during our final section. Today, we are lucky to have Sara Ramirez, Deputy Director of Microprogramming at the Ministry of Finance and Public Credit, and Omar Cabrera, Tax Manager at PricewaterhouseCoopers. Up next, we will have Sara Ramirez address the importance of the law on social investment from the national government's perspective. Sara is an economist and holds an MA in economics from Universidad de los Andes as well as an MPA in Economic Policy Management from Columbia University. For 5 years, she has been part of the technical team advising the government in macroeconomic and fiscal policy. Good morning, Sara.
Hello, everyone. Good morning. Thank you so much for the invitation. It's a pleasure for me to be here with you today. As I previously mentioned, we will be talking about the government perspectives on the law on social investment. I would just like to make sure that everyone can see the presentation right now. Perfect. So let me just start by stating that before the pandemic, Colombia had shown an outstanding economic and fiscal performance. After showing a low growth rate in 2017, Colombia's growth rate accelerated in 2018 and 2019, as we can see in the graph to the left, where it managed to exceed the global average growth rate. In particular, the Colombian economy grew by 3.3% in 2019, accelerating 0.8 percentage points compared to 2018. Also, up to 2019, Colombia had 4 consecutive years of fiscal adjustment. So this shows that despite the reduction in fiscal revenues associated to lower oil prices, the government progressively improved its fiscal balance since 2016, and it managed to reach in 2019 its first primary surplus since 2012. The COVID pandemic represented the greatest economic and social shock in Colombia's recent history, in which the government responded quickly and forcefully. And we would like to highlight, and we will show you in a minute, that without the counter-cyclical policy carried out by the national government, this crisis would have been even deeper. So basically, what we saw in terms of the economic growth in 2020 is that the sectoral closures and the suspension of productive activity that was implemented by the government to contain the spread of the virus explain why economic activity, especially economic growth, decreased by 6.8% in 2020. However, as we can see in the graph to the right, this contraction in GDP, although it was deep, it was moderate relative to our peers, and it was very close to the average decline in the region, even below the economic contractions that we saw in countries such as Mexico and Peru. So the counter-cyclical response from the government that was implemented in an immediate manner was focused on 4 pillars of action through the Emergency Mitigation Fund, which we know in Colombia as the FOME. These pillars were employment, health, companies, and households. The purpose of this fund is to attend the needs associated to healthcare, the adverse effects that were created on productive activity due to the pandemic, and the need for the economy to recover in terms of employment, poverty, and growth. So in terms of employment, in order to protect the labor market, the government implemented employment programs that consisted of wage subsidies equivalent to around 0.6% of GDP and were aimed at helping 4.15 million people. In terms of health, the government aimed to strengthen the health system to face the impacts of the pandemic through higher supply of healthcare services, the nationwide vaccine plan that was implemented, and the massive COVID testing program. In terms of businesses and companies, credit guarantees were granted through the National Guarantee Fund to provide companies with liquidity to assume fixed costs, personal expenses, and other obligations associated to their operation. And finally, in terms of households, the government aimed at protecting families' income through the creation of non-conditional cash transfers and a stronger framework of the conditional transfers that were already existing for the most vulnerable part of the population. So this is just a brief overview of what the government did in terms of the immediate response. The social programs were without a doubt essential to moderate the impact of the crisis on the poor. So during 2020, we can see in the graph to the left that the decrease in real household income was mainly explained by lower labor income, while income from institutional aid increased, which was associated to the cash transfers that we just mentioned. This increase was mainly focused also on the first and second income decile of the population, which shows that the government transfers were properly targeted and were directed to the people who needed them the most. And these higher transfers managed to mitigate the increasing poverty rate by 3.6 percentage points and extreme poverty by 4.7 percentage points in 2020. So, as a result of what we have just mentioned, the COVID-19 shock affected the country on the economic, social, and fiscal fronts. In terms of GDP levels, as we can see on the left, before the COVID-19 shock took place, we from the Ministry of Finance expected an economic growth of 3.7% for 2020. However, the COVID-19 pandemic came, and as we already mentioned, GDP growth was minus 6.8%. So the difference between these two scenarios in 2020 in terms of growth is around 10.5 percentage points, which means that the crisis had an impact equivalent to 10.5% of the real 2019 GDP. So this is the first front in which we are facing challenges, which is the economic front. The second front is the social indicators front. Just to illustrate this point, we would like to show you that even with the extraordinary measures that were implemented by the government to mitigate the impact of the COVID-19 shock on poverty rates, the pandemic resulted in a setback of poverty indicators equivalent to almost a decade of progress on this front. So by 2020, the national poverty rate was 42.5%, which, as we can see, showed an increase of 6.8 percentage points compared to 2019. Also, on the other hand, the extreme poverty was 15.1% in 2020 and increased 5.5 percentage points compared to 2019. Finally, in terms of the fiscal front and the fiscal challenges, considering the magnitude of the shock and the government response to face the crisis that we already mentioned, there were higher fiscal pressures in 2020 for the government that resulted in a sharp increase in the debt levels, as well as, of course, a higher fiscal deficit. Therefore, debt reached historic highs in 2020 at 60.4%, as we can see on the graph to the right. So, the social investment law is a central element of the fiscal policy strategy set by the national government, which has as its main objective to simultaneously provide a series of solutions on the fiscal, economic, and social fronts. So, considering what we just mentioned in terms of the economic, social, and fiscal challenges that arose as a consequence of the pandemic, Colombia needed a triad of solutions to solve the challenges on these three aspects. We would like to highlight that the concept of this triad that you can see on this slide is at the core of the policy discussion for the government. And this is explained by the fact that the nature of the shock implies that the challenges of these three fronts must be addressed at the same time, in a simultaneous way, in a coordinated way, since one of them cannot improve when the other two factors do not improve. So we would like to share with you what the pillars of the social investment law are. This is the instrument through which the government implemented this triad of solutions related to the social, economic, and fiscal fronts, where its main objective is to protect the most vulnerable, reactivate the economy, and stabilize public finances. This fiscal reform places Colombia as a pioneer in the implementation of the comprehensive economic policy package. It will allow to shore up fiscal sustainability. It will allow to strengthen fiscal institutions with a fiscal rule at the forefront and enhance economic activation with the generation of more jobs and the reduction of poverty levels. So the social investment law is based on 5 conceptual axes that act synergistically and fully address the triad of solutions that the country is currently requiring. These include the higher tax revenues, which would imply an average of 0.9% of GDP in additional tax revenues to finance social spending, fight against evasion through policies that will increase tax revenues in 0.3% of GDP starting in 2023, austerity and efficiency on spending, which would decrease current spending by 0.2% of GDP on average between 2022 and 2032, social spending and economic recovery based on initiatives that are key to recover economic activity and reduce poverty to levels lower than those we had before the pandemic. And finally, policies to improve the sustainability of public finances through an improved fiscal rule, which will ensure that we achieve future sustainability of public finances and the government's financial planning. As we mentioned in the previous slide, a main element of the social investment law corresponds to economic recovery measures, which we would like to share and mention. So the VAT discount on capital goods that was established by the growth law back in 2018 was maintained, which should keep acting as an incentive to boost investment. The Formal Employment Support Program, known as PAEF, which we have heard a lot about. This is the national government's program that consisted of a direct subsidy to the payroll of those employers who have shown a decrease in their income. It was extended until December 2021 and is focused mainly on small and medium-sized enterprises. So through this program, up to 60,000 SMEs will benefit from the extension of the PAEF program, and also this will help protect more than 400,000 jobs. The payroll subsidy for companies that were affected by the national strike is a program that provides a benefit that is equivalent to 20% of the minimum wage for the payment of labor obligations between the months in which the national strike took place, which is May and June 2021, for companies who demonstrate a drop in their income in these months compared to previous months, which could be March 2021. This program will benefit 70,000 employers and around 1.15 million employees. And finally, just to round out the employment programs, we implemented the incentive for new job creations. This is a benefit aimed at employers who create new jobs by hiring young people between the age of 18 and 28 years, and men and women over 28 years of age. So this program is expected to run until August 2023. It will benefit around 500,000 young people, 264,000 men over 28 years old, and 2,016 women over 28 years old. Also, the 3 VAT tax holidays were established for economic recovery as a measure to boost the commercial sector during the last quarter of 2021. These VAT exemptions will apply to goods such as clothing, household appliances, computers, communications equipment, sports items, and school supplies. And it will also be a benefit applied to transactions that use cash. The law also implemented a higher maximum annual revenue threshold for companies to enroll in the simple regime. So this will allow access to the simple tax regime for almost all SMEs in the country that currently pay income tax. This simple tax regime was created in 2018 to ease the tax payments to small firms and to encourage formalization. It replaces the income tax and combines the consumption and the ICA taxes. So this relaxation of this threshold for companies to enroll should keep boosting formalization and the economic recovery that we expect. Finally, the law implemented an extension of tax exemptions for tourism activities, extending the benefits that some firms from the tourism sector have until December 2022. So in terms of the main elements of the fiscal rule, just to finalize this intervention, the social investment law strengthens the fiscal rule since the fiscal targets will now ensure stabilization of debt levels. In particular, the changes to the fiscal rule include the establishment of a debt anchor and debt limit. Also, in terms of the fiscal balance targets, the estimation of the cyclical components of the fiscal balance as well as the fiscal balance targets themselves will be strengthened, which will ensure the replicability and reduction in possible biases in the estimation. The fiscal balances targets will be estimated as a function of the debt level, and this will include a correction mechanism for deviations of debt from the anchor. So basically, the main message is that debt levels are now incorporated in the estimation of the fiscal rule. Finally, the social investment law also increased the technical capacity and independence of the Fiscal Rule Committee by the creation of the Autonomous Committee of the Fiscal Rule. This new committee has greater legal and operational independence, and it was created with the objective of enhancing the functions, legal, and operational independence of the Fiscal Council to strengthen the fiscal policy framework and avoid biases in the government's fiscal strategy. So just to wrap up, We would just like to show you that we can see here in this slide the net effects of the social investment law on the central government's fiscal balance. Our estimations indicate that we will have additional revenue due to higher taxes, less evasion, and austerity in spending, which will be partially offset by higher social spending targeted on reducing poverty and encouraging higher employment, as we already mentioned. All in all, these measures would result in an average of 0.9 percentage points of GDP of additional revenues in the medium term. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much for your insightful presentation, Sara. We will now continue with Omar Cabrera, who will highlight the main modifications in the tax regime for companies brought by the law on social investment, as well as the legal measures and incentives provided by this law aimed at the promotion of employment relationships, job creation, and providing additional contributions for companies. Omar is a lawyer specialized in international economic law from Universidad Externado. He also holds a master's degree in taxation from Universidad de los Andes. He has been a researcher at the Externado Center for Fiscal Studies and the Colombian Institute of Tax Law. He is also a consultant regarding national and international taxation, international tax planning, tax due diligence, and M&A operations. Good morning, Omar.
Hi, good morning, everyone. I would like to thank Invest Bogota and also the Colombian Ministry of Public Finance for organizing and participating in this event so we can discuss the main changes of the social investment law, which is a very relevant topic nowadays for Colombia. I'm sharing my screen. The idea here is to focus on the particular tax changes introduced by this new social investment law recently passed by the Colombian Congress. But first, I would like to stop to provide some general insights about the general background which triggered the passing of this bill in Colombia. Many of these points were previously mentioned by Sara, so I'm just going to go through them very briefly. Obviously, the main reason that drive the passing of the bill was a budget deficit in Colombia, which was exacerbated by this economic crisis triggered by the pandemic of COVID-19. Also, this led to Colombia losing its investment grade that was granted in 2011. Finch and Standard & Poor during the last 6 months reduced the Colombian investment grade. So now the country is below the investment grade threshold. And also there is another factor, which is the national strike, which took place during the months of May, between May and June of this year, and was the longest strike ever seen in Colombian history. But the background, there is another element, is that considering all the economic difficulties triggered by COVID-19, the Colombian government presented to the Congress a very comprehensive and a very complete tax bill that was intended to overhaul many of the current tax principles in Colombia. The idea was to modify the personal income tax to increase rate, to lower the threshold to be a taxpayer. Also, they were keen in overhauling many VAT exemptions that were in place in Colombia, eliminate some income tax holidays, but this was the factor that triggered the national strike. So the government presented an initial tax bill, which was very wide in its content, but due to the national strike, the people there was some social unrest due to the content of this tax bill. So after the submission of the bill, the national strike started. So this led to the government to represent a new bill, which is the bill we have in hand now, which is the social investment law. But this law is mainly focused on the taxation of companies rather than on individuals. So the reason is because the initial bill produced that social unrest, but now this new bill was passed easily because it is only focused on companies. So that being said, we're going to start mentioning the main elements on how this tax bill will affect companies and businesses. Uh, so that being said, the well, the cornerstone point of this new tax bill is a rise in the corporate income tax rate. Colombia, historically has put in place very high CIT rates, even if compared with our peers in Latin America. So during 2018, the idea was to gradually reduce the general CIT, and the idea was to have a CIT rate of 30% starting fiscal year 2020. But due to the interruption of this COVID pandemic issue and all this economic distress, the new tax bill, the social investment law, will raise the general CIT to 35% starting fiscal year 2022. Uh, so this is going to be the most important element that is going to raise the recordation of taxes in Colombia. So this new tax rate is going to apply to local and foreign companies and to branches of foreign companies. So, as I mentioned, this rise in the CIT will not affect the taxation of individuals in Colombia. However, there is also a surtax for financial institutions. This is not new. Uh, the tax bill that was passed during 2018 created this surtax. And even this surtax was sued before the Colombian Constitutional Court, but the court upheld that this surtax was within the Constitution. So the government decided to keep this surtax, but it's only limited for those entities that could be deemed as a financial institution. There is another point here is that, as you can see, this law overhaul many of the changes that were supposed to happen in 2020. Because in 2020, the tax rate should be at 30%. Now it's going to be 35%. The surtax was no longer applicable. And also, there is a very important point here is the third thing in this presentation is that in Colombia, there is a local turnover tax known as ICA. The ICA is assessed over gross revenue, and the rates spans between 0.4% to 1%. But in some cities, such as Bogota, the rate could go up to 1.4%. The idea is that the ICA should be completely 100% credit against the income tax liability of the local taxpayers. However, the new investment law modified this rule and limit the credit to 50%, which was the thing that was in place for fiscal year 2021, and this credit was supposed to rise to 100% starting fiscal year 2022. However, if we go through the social investment law, at the end of the law, there is a provision mentioning that the government will assess whether it is convenient to increase this credit to 100%. But as the things are now, for fiscal year 2022, only 50% of any ICA, of any turnover local tax paid, is going to be credited uh, against the income tax liability. There is another important issue here is that in Colombia, there is in place a special regime for what is known as the orange economy, which is related to creative industries, to filmmaking, etc. And there is a tax holiday in which companies uh, that are within this tax holiday are not subject to income tax for 7 years. So the final income tax liability is zero. And initially, this was applicable for any company that was incorporated and that filed the request to be able to participate in this tax holiday before December 2021, but the social investment law provides for an extension of the deadline to qualify for this tax holiday until June 30, 2022. So there is an extension that the idea here is that more companies could apply for this tax holiday, considering that uh, one of the ideas of this government is to generate in Colombia an environment for these companies to carry on businesses. The idea is that Colombia became an important country related to the development of creative industries. Uh, just to finalize this part of the presentation, one has to take into account that this rise in the general CIT, the general income tax rate, will not impact nor affect the preferential tax rates that are already in place in Colombia, because this rate that I'm mentioning here is the general rate, but in Colombia you can find several companies that are subject to a special income tax rate. So the most significant example is here, which are companies in free trade zones, because those companies are subject to a preferential 20% income tax rate. But those companies are not going to be affected by the tax bill because they continue with the right to liquidate their income tax liability, considering the special rate to which they are entitled to apply. Just to refer about the financial entities surcharge, uh, at the end of the day, considering that the surtax is going to be 3% during fiscal years 2020, 2022, 24, 2025. So we're going to have this surtax for 4 years, and at the end of the day, if you look at this, the nominal tax rate for these kind of companies is going to be 38%. So it is a very high income tax rate. Uh, Also, the bill mentioned that this surtax should be paid via prepayment. So the financial entity is liable to pay this surtax through a prepayment, and the prepayment is going to be paid as well in two installments. So you have to pay them you have to pay this in two payments. There is a conclusion about this, but it is important to stress in the fact that this surtax only applies if the taxable base, the income taxable base of this financial entity exceeds this amount of Colombian tax units. Here I have the conversion to Colombian pesos and also US dollars. So we have that any company which is deemed as a financial entity that liquidates taxable base for income tax purposes higher than roughly 4 Colombian billion pesos, or $1 million, a little more, is going to be liable to pay this surtax. So, and the surtax should be paid during the 4 years that is going to be in place. There is another issue that is very important here, is that considering again all these economic problems triggered by the COVID-19 pandemic, the tax bill includes some tax payment facilities that are targeted to those companies that were not able to pay their taxes due to these economic difficulties of the pandemic. So, according to this new concept, any taxpayer who has outstanding tax to pay by June 30, 2021, and that could not pay its tax obligations because this is the key element here, to be able to demonstrate that you were not able to pay due to the COVID-19. So you have to demonstrate properly that you have a tax to pay, but you were willing to pay the taxes, but you weren't able to do it because you were affected economically speaking by the pandemic. So if you fulfill these two requirements, that there is an outstanding tax to pay considering this date, and that you are not able to pay the tax due to COVID-19, you can apply for a tax payment facility before the tax office. It is important to stress that this tax payment facility is not only applicable for any outstanding tax before the National Colombian Tax Office, known as the DIAN, but also the law allows local tax offices to implement this program. So if you have a tax to pay to a municipality in Colombia, and that municipality adopts this regime, you can apply for this tax payment facility. Which are the benefits for applying to this? The first one is that it's going to be a reduction of the tax penalty. So if you agree with the tax office, either local or national, for this tax payment facility, automatically you have the right to a reduction of 20% in the tax penalties that you do related to that outstanding tax to pay. Also, there is a special regime considering the default interest, because the taxpayer in this case is entitled to a reduction. In this case, it's also a reduction on 20% of the tax rate, because for tax purposes, the default interest corresponds to the maximum interest allowed by the Colombian Superintendents of Finance. The last thing is just a formal procedure. The taxpayer should agree this payment facility before December 21, 2020. So at the end of the day, in order to apply for this special payment facility, you should request before the tax office this before the year end. At this stage, there is some guidance draft prepared by the Colombian Tax Office, the DIAN, on how this payment facility will work. But at this point, it is only a draft. So we will have to wait until the tax office issues the final guidance in order to know exactly how this tax payment facility is going to work out, because there are some procedural issues that are not very clear at this moment, but those issues should be deal with this regulation. So we hope that within a month or less, there's going to be a final guidance about this issue, and we would know the final regulation that would apply for these tax payment facilities. So as was mentioned by Sarah, I'm following many other cases around the world during the earliest stage of the pandemic. Many governments implemented some programs in order to support or to protect formal employment. Colombia was not the exception. So during the first months of the pandemic, the Colombian government put in place a program known as PAEF, as mentioned by Sarah, is the support to formal employment. So the idea was to avoid that the pandemic will generate, will worsen the situation of the employment in Colombia, because historically Colombia has been characterized as a country with very high unemployment rates, and during the last year, this rate was was descending, but due to the interruption, due to the arrival of the pandemic, well, the employment was severely affected by this economic situation. So this is just a very brief explanation about how this support works, in order to understand how the social investment law modified or extended the program. So the first thing is created during the early stage of the pandemic to avoid losing jobs. That is the idea of the program, what is intended to. This program is available for companies or individuals as long as they are employers, which due to the pandemic have a reduction of 20% of the income. So in this case, in order to calculate this 20% threshold, the Colombian Ministry of Employment issued a regulation, a guidance, in which you have to compare the income of the last month before the program and compare it with that same month of 2019, so that you can see that there is a reduction considering March 2019 and March 2020, or the average between the income reported in January and February, so that in March, which is the month where actually the pandemic started for Colombia, when we were subject to lockdowns and all these measures that triggered the economic difficulties. So you can see that there is a reduction of the 20%. And also it was limited to employers with have at least 3 employees. And for such employees should be registered for payroll purposes. Well, because in Colombia you have to liquidate social security and pension and health, and thus that contribution should be made through an official mechanism known as PILA, which is the government system to liquidate these social security contributions. So in order to apply for this program, the employer should be able to demonstrate that he has 3 employees registered before that PILA, and that they are paying their social security contribution considering a base of at least one minimum Colombian wage. So if you fulfill these requirements, you could apply for this support. Or there is a formal procedure to request. There is a submission that should be made before the Colombian authorities. There are some formalities, but we are not going to stop about that because due to the time, and also because it's something that is very formal, not substantial about how this support works. And the other element here that is very, very important is, well, how to calculate the support, because the support is a monetary aid that is going to be transferred by the Colombian government, considering these funds that Sarah mentioned before, this fund that was created or was funded to mitigate the economic difficulties of the pandemic. So in this case, the benefit or the money that is going to be transferred to the person or the company that is entitled to the support is calculated considering this form to the right. You have to take the number of employees and multiply it by 40% of a minimal Colombian wage. If you see at the end of this presentation, there is the minimum wage in Colombian pesos and converted into US dollars. And also we have multiplied that 40% base. So this is going to be the base to which you are going to multiply the number of employees. But the number of employees should be determined between the lower number of those two alternatives. The number of employees registering the payroll of the PILA, as I mentioned, which is this system that centralizes all the social security payments, or the number of employees to be protected. Why this? Because in the submission, it is required that the employer should mention how many jobs they are going to protect. So you have to take the lower number between that representation of the employer or the number of employees that employer has registered before the payroll. So this is how this formal support to employment works. Initially, the idea was to provide for this aid only during 3 months. Then the government, considering that the pandemic was not evolving well and the economic difficulties were still applicable and were getting worsened, they decided to extend this program until the end of the year. Then there was a law that was passed because at the end of the year, the powers that the Colombian president have during the pandemic situation in order to cope against this situation were over, because Colombian constitutions provides that the executive branch could establish an emergency state in Colombia and is able to issue regulation that otherwise will correspond to the Congress. But considering that at the end of December, those powers were were over, there was no way to restore them because the express prohibition of the Colombian Constitution, then a legislation was passed. So there is a law that keep this program and extended the program also. But considering the problems of the national strike and also COVID-19 still, the social investment law also modified this support. The first issue here that is very important is that it was extended until December 2021. So we're going to have this support to formal employment until the end of this year. Also, this program is only available for employers with a maximum of 50 employees. But also, there is a special rule in which employers with more employees could even apply to this program, but the money the money that is going to be transferred to this employer is only limited to the calculation that we already mentioned, but consider it to be limited, to be capped to 50 employees. So if you have 60 employees, you are still going to be able to make your submission to benefit from this program, but the money that is going to be transferred to you is going to be capped to the 50 employees. So no one is going to receive any money transfer or any governmental aid for any part that exceeds 50 employees. There is another issue here, is that although the extension of the law of the program, as I mentioned, is going to be until December 2021, there is a possibility that could be extended until December 2022, but this is subject to some conditions being met, particularly is how this program will evolve and also how the necessity for the program will change. So this is going to be analyzed, but at this point, it's only applicable until December of this year, but maybe if certain conditions are fulfilled, it could be extended until December of the next year, 2022. And is available the program for employers that, as per March 2020, fulfill the requirements. So here you can see that this is, this is clear that the extension of the program was not only for due to COVID difficulties, but also to the national strike difficulties. Again, as mentioned by Sarah, there is another program. This is new. This is a new program because the PAEF was already in place. The only issue that was made by the social investment law considering this program was to modify certain issues, but mainly is to extend the program. But this subsidy to create new jobs is a new element introduced by the social investment law. So as you can see, the goal here is to provide for a subsidy to employers in order to create new jobs. But this subsidy is targeted in particularly groups of the Colombian populations. And those groups are the ones who are more vulnerable to unemployment. In Colombia, as I mentioned, unemployment is very high, and it is expected to be high for at least in the medium term. But if you analyze the unemployment in Colombia based on different groups, considering age, considering gender, and other factors, young people has the worst burden here because the unemployment between young people is higher than any of the other groups. So this is a program that is going to be targeted to young people, also to women, because women are also very vulnerable to unemployment in Colombia, and also to certain to employees who have a very low labor income. So you have here that there are three groups: young people, women, and these employees who earn less than 3 Colombian minimum wages, which are roughly about 3 Colombian million pesos. Is not very much. Is less than $1,000. But this program is going to be in place until August 2023. It's limited to only 12 monthly payments. So for if you consider an employer individually, he can only receive 12 monthly payments. And also, similar to what happened with the PAEF, this program could be extended if there are positive results. So they're going to analyze whether providing this subsidy helps to create new jobs. And if that is the case, the government will analyze to continue and to extend this program. How the program works is similar to the PAEF, is a money transfer, and how it's calculated. In this case, it's different from the PAEF. The thresholds are different. So if you hire young people, then you have a subsidy of 25% of a minimum wage. But if you hire women who earn less than 3 minimum wages in Colombia, the subsidy is 15%. And for employees earning less than 3 Colombian minimum wages, the subsidy is only 10% of a minimum wage. So look how the law focus especially on young people, because if you hire these people, the subsidy is higher, is 25% instead of the 50% for women, and instead of the 10% that would apply for the other employees. So in order to apply for this subsidy, you must demonstrate that you hire new people, because these subsidies to create new jobs, not to keep jobs that were already in place, because that is the reason of existence of the PAEF, to keep employment. This program is to create employment. So this is a very important difference between the subsidy to create new jobs and the PAEF. The last subsidy, which is relevant for this seminar, is the subsidy to companies that were affected by the national strike. So because we have a twofold component of this economic crisis during 2021, the first one is the COVID-19 situation, which is not only affecting Colombia, which affect all the world, but there is the other thing, which was the national strike. The national strike was something that obviously happened in Colombia, so the country that was affected due to this was Colombia. So bearing in mind that many companies, many employers were severely affected by this strike, because all the roads were blocked, airports, people on the streets marching, stores were closed, the supply chain was broken, so etc. So these people affected by the national strike could apply for a monetary transfer by the government, a subsidy, and is limited to those employers that were not able to pay wages during May and June due to the strike. So look that there is a similarity between this subsidy and the last one. I'm going to go to this, to the subsidy to create new jobs. So there is a similarity because both programs are keen in some way to keep the employment. But in this case, one has to bear in mind that both subsidies cannot work concurrently. So you cannot apply simultaneously to the subsidy to companies affected by national strike and also to the subsidy to create new jobs. They cannot work concurrently. You must choose one of them. But this subsidy to companies affected by the national strike can apply concurrently with the PAEF, and also the subsidy to create new jobs. So the PAE is the only subsidy that can work concurrently with either this subsidy related to the national strike or the subsidy to create new jobs. In this case, in order to apply for the subsidy to companies affected by the national strike, is limited to employers that were not able to pay wages during the months of the strike. They must demonstrate that they have a reduction of 20% in their income. In order to calculate this threshold, this is going to be subject to regulation. For now, we are not aware of the regulation, so we will have to wait until the government issue the final regulation. How is calculated the subsidy is the number of employees. And here it doesn't matter whether you have 50 employees or more than 50 employees. unlike the PAEF. In this case, it doesn't matter, and you would multiply by a 20% of a minimum wage. That is the way. That you calculate the amount of the money that is going to be transferred to you due to this subsidy. And the last issue that we want to present here that we consider that is important of the social investment law is the VAT tax holiday. This is not new. This tax holiday was created in the tax bill of 2019, sorry. And the idea is to create 3 days in which there's going to be a VAT exemption for certain goods. Such goods are clothing, home appliances, computers, toys, supplies for agriculture. So what the change here? So the key question is here: what was changed due to the social investment law? The change is that, as mentioned by Sarah, now you can pay in cash because the initial law requires that the payments of the goods should be made via a financial products, credit card, debit card, and not by cash. But now you can still apply for the tax holiday even if you pay for the goods in cash. And also there is a modification which is very relevant and is related to the threshold the price threshold of the goods, because initially it was limit and now it was extended to 80 Colombian tax units, which converted to US dollars is about $800. So this is a new threshold. This tax holiday applies only in 3 days of the year. Next Thursday is going to be the first VAT tax holiday in Colombia during 2021, and there's going to be another one in November, and there's going to be another one in December in order to foster those purchases made during that month, considering the holidays, Christmas, etc. So just to conclude this part, the main element here is that the threshold was increased to this new threshold, and more goods are going to be covered next Thursday in this VAT tax holiday. So thank you. We hope that this was very helpful to you, this general insight about the Colombian social investment law. So again, thank you all for your attention to this presentation.
Thank you so much for your solid contributions to this panel, Omar. We will now open the floor for questions raised by the participants, for which we invite both Sara and Omar to join us in this section. In the meantime, we will be forwarding the questions we have collected so far. So according to the chat, the first question is for Omar, and it goes as follows. Did the tax bill struck down existing tax holidays for income tax purposes?
No, the initial bill presented by Congress was intended to do that, but at the end, the social investment law did not modify any tax holiday for income tax purposes. So the tax holidays for agricultural investment, for reforestation, orange economy are in place. So the taxpayer continue to have this benefit for income tax purposes.
Okay, thank you so much, Omar. And the following question will be then for Sara. And it says, what do you consider have been the main drivers of economic growth in 2021? Will the same trend continue in 2022?
Okay, thank you so much for your question. So we have seen so far a remarkable economic recovery that has been driven mainly by a stronger than expected performance of many economic sectors, also helped by the fact that COVID cases, vaccination process has been on our side in that sense. We have seen especially a remarkable behavior of the manufacturing and commercial sectors. Those have been the main drivers for growth during 2021, and this is expected to continue for 2022 also. We have seen that, for instance, the manufacturing sector has grew in August 23% compared to August from last year, and 10% compared to August from 2018, which shows that the sector is already above pre-pandemic levels. This has also been the trend with commercial activities. We saw that the sector grew by 32% in August relative to the same month of 2020, and almost 10% respect to 2019. So, as well as the manufacturing industry, it is also above pre-pandemic levels. And we are expecting that if these levels of economic activity in these two sectors are maintained throughout the rest of the year, which is a very conservative assumption to make, considering what we have mentioned of the tax holidays that are approaching during the last quarter of the year, we could expect the commercial activities to grow around 15% and manufacturing activities to grow around 20%. So we expect this trend, as I mentioned, to continue during 2022, given the dynamics of these two sectors. So these should be our main drivers also for next year.
Thank you so much, Sara. The next question would be for Omar, and it goes as follows. Did the tax bill modify the taxation of dividends?
No, initially there was going to be a rise in the personal income tax rate for dividends received by individuals, but at the end there was no modification about dividend taxation, so we will still have the previous rules about dividend taxation, and no modification will apply.
Thank you so much, Omar. An additional question raised for Omar is does the tax reform affect the taxation of portfolio foreign investment?
Well, initially, and due to losing the investment grade, there was a provision in the initial tax bill that was going to reduce the withholding tax rate for dividend payments made by the Colombian government due to foreign debt. But at the end, the social investment law did not provide for that. So at this point, we're going to have a 5% withholding tax for this payment interest made by the Colombian government.
Thank you so much, Omar. Considering both of your presentations, another question that comes up for Sara in this case would be, how is the recovery of employment going in relative terms compared to the recovery of the economic activity? And in which sectors is the recovery of employment concentrating?
Okay, well, we have seen that there has been kind of a lagged recovery of employment relative to the recovery that we have seen in economic activity. This is something that is usual when these types of crises take place. So there is a usual lag in which the employment sector or which employment measures recover with some months after economic activity tends to show this strong recovery as we have seen so far. We saw that during the worst stages of the pandemic, which was last year, between February and April 2020, we lost almost 6 million jobs. Exactly 5.8 million jobs were lost during those 2 months. But so far, up to August 2021, we have recovered around 5 million jobs. So we have seen that around 87% of the jobs we lost due to the pandemic have been recovered. And this is even though we have seen a lag with respect to economic activity, which is already around pre-pandemic levels. Employment is not there yet. But this recovery has been above the recovery that we have seen in countries such as Chile, Brazil, Spain, the US. So this is something that we are certain that economic recovery has helped, as well as the programs implemented by the social investment law in this matter. Specifically, the recovery of employment has been focused in the commercial and construction sectors. These have been the sectors that have gathered the highest recovery in employment. We have also seen a very dynamic recovery in employment in the lodging, like hotel sectors, food services sector, professional activity sector. So this has been mainly the characterization of how employment has recovered so far this year.
Thank you so much, Sara. And maybe if no further questions are raised from the public, we would like to raise an additional one for Omar. regarding if the fact that the tax reform may provide an amnesty for the tax audits already in place?
Yeah, this is not new. To be honest, in the last 3 or 4 tax reforms, this kind of rule were introduced. And the idea here is that any taxpayer who is subject to an audit before the enacting of the law could reach an agreement with the tax office in order to be entitled to a reduction of interest and also to penalties. And even if there is a law action because the taxpayer presented a lawsuit, it can also be they can also reach an agreement with the tax office to pay a reduced tax penalty and reduce interest in order to stop that legal procedure.
Thank you so much, both Omar and Sara. I don't know if maybe you would like to make any final remarks regarding your presentations before we finalize our event. No? Okay.
Well, so,
Omar, maybe?
well, just to summarize, we think that there is going to be a new tax bill passed next year because, as you know, we have elections to be held next year and we will have a new president on August. And this tax bill is very helpful because it's going to help to cope with this economic situation, but we will have to wait for next year to, the scope of the new bill that is going to be presented presumably at the end of 2022.
Okay, thank you so much, Omar and Sara. Again, with this and with no further questions from our attendees, we are finalizing today's event. We would like to thank once again, our panelists for their sound and clear presentations and our attendees for their interest on this relevant topic, as well as for the valuable questions raised, furthering conversations on the matter. We look forward to having all of you in future events, both in English and in Spanish, here at Invest in Bogota. And once again, thank you all for your contributions to this discussion.
Thank you for the invitation and for all of you for joining this event.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure for us to be here. It was a pleasure to get to know Omar, and we hope to see you soon again.
Me as well. Bye, everyone.
Hi, let me show you a special place. I'm going to talk to you about that place in Latin America, the capital of Colombia. That country you might have heard mentioned in the news and in the movies. That country has now changed. And its capital, Bogota, well, it's what makes it shine even more. Bogota is a big city. And I mean big because there are more than 11 million of us. We have big dreams, projects, and companies, as well as big festivals and big mountains. We also have big talent. We are the region's entrepreneurship capital, the continent's new business hub, and a UNESCO City of Music. Because on top of being kind and friendly, every day our people show their ability to work on innovative and creative ideas that transform the world. Today we are ready to keep growing and welcome other great companies so that we can do things better together.
In the last few years, we've received over 1,500 foreign companies,
Such as Scotiabank, Medtronic, H&M, Amazon, L'Oreal, and Diageo, amongst others, that through their capabilities, technologies, and by generating high-quality employment, have helped the economy to keep growing so that more companies, tourists, and students come to Bogota. And like all good Latinos, we know how to enjoy life.
the best Latin nightlife and live music, world-class restaurants, 6 open-air festivals of different music styles, professional film, music, arts, fashion, and food markets.
Because here, we call chicken soup ajiaco, cheese buns almojábana, and buses, well, Transmilenio. I would like to show you more things, but I know you don't have that much time. That's why I'd like to invite you to discover more about us and see that what I'm telling you is true.
That's in the words of those who dare to do business with us.
Those who set out on an adventure to explore, discover, savor, and have fun in Bogota. We are here to help you set up in Bogota, succeed in business, and discover the huge opportunities that the city holds. And this is our team. Say hi, guys.
The best partner you can find.